This is the Plant Yourself Podcast. I'm Howard Jacobson of PlantYourself.com and the Big Change Program with Josh LaJaunie. This podcast is part of my mission to help you live a meaningful and merciful life. Two quick things before we get to today's episode. First of all, big shout out to all of my buddies in the Missing Chins Run Club who were on Good Morning America last week. Josh LaJaunie and Tim Kaufman and Marcus Cook and Joshua Turner and Jason Cohen and Justin Lacey, and of course all of the Chins who didn't make it up to New York but are still representing in their own communities and on social media and doing the thing. If you're not sure what the Missing Chins Run Club is, it's been featured in Runner's World and People Magazine. It's a group of, as Josh describes it, ex-beer-drinking, back-slapping fat boys who discovered running and a plant-based diet. And man, 7 minutes live on Good Morning America is an amazing accomplishment. So if you want to see that, I've created a redirect from Plant Yourself to that video. All you have to do is go to plantyourself.com/GMA for Good Morning America, GMA all lowercase, and you can watch that yourself. It's really amazing. And it would be great if you could share that on your own social media feeds to help spread the word. It's a wonderful little segment. If you're really into the plant-based thing, you may at first be a little bit disappointed because they only mention it a couple times and it's not the highlight or the centerpiece of the story. Really, community is. And at the same time, I can't tell you how many men from around the country have become really interested and have requested to join because we didn't start out by saying, hey, join this vegan club, but simply sort of putting in the idea of plant-based a little bit and talking about this camaraderie and these transformations that these men have made. It's a wonderful opening for open-minded men who want to change their lives. So again, plantyourself.com/GMA, go watch it, share it. It's amazing. Second thing is, today's guest has a book that he sent to me, and I've got 2 copies to give away, and it's phenomenal. So the guest is Nathan Runkle, who is the founder of Mercy for Animals, and I'll talk about all that in just a minute as an introduction. The book is called Mercy for Animals. It was written by Nathan and my buddy Gene Stone, who is a friend of the podcast, and some of you may know Gene and I have an occasional other podcast called the Trump Survival Guide podcast based on Gene's book of the same name. And so, you know, anything written with Gene is going to be phenomenal. He's the writer that I would like to grow up to be one day. And the book is great. I can't tell you how moving and exciting and interesting and inspiring it is. And it's a wonderful book for people who are not fully in the plant-based or animal welfare or animal rights or environmental communities, because it just makes so much damn sense that the way we treat animals in factory farms, even if you think eating them is fine, that the way we treat them is nothing short of cruel and torturous, and it's got to stop. And it's a wonderful way in for people who are not willing to embrace all the aspects of the plant-based lifestyle. So that said, we got a book giveaway because he sent me 2 copies. He's actually sent me 3. I'm keeping one. I ain't parting with that third one. But 2 of them are going to be given away. And I don't really know how to do this. So I've been asking around and getting some ideas. And I think what I would like is to enter the drawing for a chance to win one of the books. I'd like you to listen to this episode and then share it on some social media platform of your own and write a little blurb about why you think the people who follow you, who like your stuff, who listen to you in your network, would get something out of listening to this particular episode. So this doesn't, it benefits me in that, it gets more people to hear about the podcast, but it's not a direct benefit. I'm not asking you to, go to iTunes and review Plant Yourself. I'm not asking you to join my email list, but really to help spread the word around Nathan and his work. So for every, and then what I want you to do is email me a link to that post. I'm on the big ones, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. So if you email me a link to each of those posts, that'll be one entry in the drawing. The other thing is, I don't really feel like spending $40 to send this to, Kuala Lumpur or somewhere outside of the US or Canada. So sorry about that, but please, if you're not somewhere where I can mail it cheaply, media mail, I'm not going to do it. So with that said, listen to the episode, and then if you think it's worthy of sharing and you'd like to be entered into the drawing to win the book, post on some social media, maybe Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, about what you got out of this episode and why you think other folks would benefit from listening. Email me the link at hj@plantyourself.com. And within a couple of weeks, I hope to announce the 2 winners. Okay, so on to today's interview. I've got to say that this is one of those interviews that makes me really thankful that I decided 4 years ago to start a podcast. Which is to say, there's a lot of people that I can talk to, just who are doing amazing things, but they're accessible. But there's a bunch of people who are kind of so busy and so crucial to their movements that they're highly, I would say, strategic about how they use their time. They're not just going to have a chat with some guy just because he wants to talk to them. And it has nothing to do with not being generous. After all, these people are giving their entire lives to a cause bigger than themselves. It's simply about being strategic. And so I thank my lucky stars that I've gotten the Plant Yourself podcast to the place where a certain type of person finds it strategic to speak to me. And one of those people is Nathan Runkle, who he's like in his 30s, and his organization is like 16 years old, and he started when he was 15. So here's a guy who has grown into leadership literally from adolescence on, for leading the same organization, Mercy for Animals, which has done incredible work in the world. From their famous undercover exposés of the cruelties that go on in factory farms, to their legal stuff around changing the laws around animal agriculture, to corporate outreach to companies to get them to sort of bend to public pressure and improve the way they treat the animals in their supply chains, to education for the rest of us. Mercy for Animals is a model of how to build a successful, effective, hard-hitting, compassionate organization that is inclusive, that gets people to want to help rather than trying to, bully or shame or guilt or shout them into activism, as you'll hear Nathan say during our interview. So it's such a huge honor to have someone like this sharing an hour with me and with you, with all of us. And I hope you get as much out of it as I have. So enjoy the interview. I'll be back on the other side of it to remind you about the giveaway and how you can enter, and to give you the usual, the garden news, the running news, and of course to thank all the patrons of the podcast. By the way, you can become a patron. Just go to plantyourself.com and look on the right sidebar for Patreon, and you can support the show as well. But I digress, because now it's time to bring you this phenomenal human being. So without further ado, Nathan Runkle, welcome to the Plant Yourself podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
It's so exciting to have you. In fact, you're one of the people that I didn't think I was big enough to get. I have like a wish list, and you were on the wish list, and then your publicist reached out, and I was like, oh my God, this is so exciting.
It's an exciting day for both of us.
We'll see. So you are the founder and I guess executive director of Mercy for Animals?
Yeah, the founder and president of Mercy for Animals. Yep.
President. So maybe we'll start. This is a podcast that's focused on all things sort of health and wellness and environment and planet, focusing largely on plant-based nutrition. And I haven't gotten into the animal welfare, animal rights, animal protection that much. And for various reasons. But so for folks who may not be familiar, can you talk a little bit about Mercy for Animals, just what it is today?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are an international organization that is dedicated to preventing cruelty to farmed animals and promoting compassionate food choices and policies. And we carry out this work in 6 countries: Canada, US, Mexico, India, Hong Kong, Brazil, through 4 program areas. The first is undercover investigations, which is really what we're most known for, sending people into factory farms, slaughterhouses, hatcheries, livestock auctions, wired with hidden cameras to document the daily violence and brutality that the nearly 9 billion land animals that are raised and killed for food are subjected to. Our second program area is corporate outreach, so working with major corporations, everyone from Walmart to McDonald's to Nestle, and really pushing them away from the worst factory farm abuses. Things like keeping mother pigs locked in gestation crates where they can't turn around. Things like keeping egg-laying hens locked in battery cages the size of a file cabinet with up to 7 birds. Things like getting baby calves out of veal crates where they also can't turn around or even lie down comfortably. Our third program area is legal advocacy, so pushing for stronger protection for farmed animals on both the state and federal level. Most people don't know that there's not a single federal law that provides protection to farmed animals during their life on the farm. One of the few federal laws that does exist is the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act, which completely exempts birds, which make up over 95% of the animals raised and killed for food. And on a state level, most states have common farming exemptions, which essentially legalize horribly cruel practices, from mutilating animals without painkillers to keeping them in tiny cages where they can't move, things that would be illegal to dogs or cats but are deemed legal for farmed animals. So we work to change that system. We also work to hold animal abusers accountable for violating state anti-cruelty statutes, like maliciously torturing farm animals. And our fourth program area is education. So really informing consumers about who farmed animals are, the fact that these animals have rich emotional lives, they're intelligent, they're sensitive, just like the dogs and cats so many of us love. They deserve our protection, and encourage people to move towards a plant-based diet. Eat less meat, more plants. So those are the 4 program areas that Mercy for Animals has to help animals.
Great. And you started the organization when you were in high school, right?
Yeah, when I was 15 years old, I started Mercy for Animals. Yep.
Right. So you've been on a lot of podcasts, and one of the things I always worry about is just having you do a podcast that's already out there. So I'm going to encourage people to first of all, you have a book that just came out on September 12th. Mm-hmm. It's called Mercy for Animals.
That's right.
So you're
I
consistent
encourage
branding.
Everyone to. Yeah, that's right. And I hope any listener that's interested will pick it up. It's partly my story of growing up on a small crop farm in rural Ohio. I was born on a couch in a city of, a village of less than 2,000 people. I was slated to be a 5th generation farmer. But it tells my story of sort of awakening to the plight of animals used for food, and becoming vegetarian, becoming vegan, and then starting Mercy for Animals, as you said, when I was 15, in this farming community. And it really follows my path. But it also is the story of our brave undercover investigators who do some of the work that I was describing before. It talks a lot about many of the biggest successes that we've been able to accomplish. It tells personal stories of animals too, inside of these factory farms, some of which we've been able to rescue, many that we haven't. Talks about the emotional and intellectual lives of these animals. And we talk about the future of food, and how we can, look at solving not only the issue of industrial animal agriculture, but how are we going to feed 9 billion people by 2050 on this globe. And then it ends with practical tips that everyone can implement into their lives to help animals. So it's a book I'm really proud of, and I hope that it will help inspire a new generation of people to advocate on behalf of animals, and that they'll find it entertaining and moving and inspiring and helpful on a practical level as well.
Yeah, and I got to say, I got a PDF copy, pre-publication, and it had the words "Do not distribute" watermarked over every page. So I figured I would just sort of like breeze through it and take some notes, and I found myself sobbing, shaking. It took me twice as long to read as I had figured, based on my experience. It is a phenomenally important book, and thank God it's got good stories in it and pictures and and sort of interest and intrigue, because it is a very compelling, challenging topic. And and we can go into a little bit of sort of my reactions and your reactions to those reactions. But for anyone, like, just hit pause, go to Amazon, or better yet, your local bookshop, and buy or order Mercy for Animals. It's it really is ripping a Band-Aid off this incredibly large festering wound in our culture.
Yeah, it is. It's sort of a no holds bar look at the issue facing farmed animals, and it is story based. I think it's really important to talk about an issue that can seem so massive. When we talk about 9 billion animals used for food every year in the U.S. alone, I mean, none of us can truly comprehend what 9 billion individual animals looks like. But each one of these animals has their own story. And, I tried in the book to capture just a few of those stories, and to also capture the story of the investigators. These are people that operate in the shadows necessarily to be able to go undetected and go and penetrate these very secretive industries. And, their work has led to, just massive change and really helped catapult and drive so many of the changes to protect animals that we've seen. So this is really the first book that gives people such an intimate, detailed account of what it's like for these investigators. And, as you said, it's there are definitely stories in the book that don't shy away from the reality. And I think it's necessary, as you said, to pull the Band-Aid off and for us to really have these conversations. I think that's what drives change. But I hope that ultimately people will walk away from the book feeling empowered and inspired. I talk about stories of transformation. People that used to be farmers that raised animals for slaughter that became animal advocates. I talk about people, finding their unique voices. I talk about a vegan race car driver that uses her platform to promote vegan eating to NASCAR fans. I say with this work, I see the darkest side of humanity, and I see the cruelty and violence that we're capable of inflicting on animals. But I also see the brightest side of humanity. I see how kind and generous and selfless and dedicated people can be to helping animals and farmed animals, those who are just so weak and vulnerable to cruelty. So I hope that people will just be moved in a whole host of ways by the book, and like I said, walk away inspired to do more.
Great. So I'd love to dive into some of the things in the book. Now, you've told your story a lot, but I would love for you to just share briefly the story of the piglet that really catalyzed your life.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was 15, this is back in 1999, our local high school, Graham High, had an agriculture program. As I said, I was in a village of less than 2,000 people, so the high school populated mostly by farmers and their students. So there was an agriculture class taught by a man named Steve Jenkins, and it came to the point in the curriculum where they were going to do a dissection project. So Mr. Jenkins decided that he would kill about half a dozen piglets on his farm and bring them to school the next morning to be used in this project. Mr. Jenkins was a pig farmer. He raised over 10,000 pigs, so a large operation. The morning of the project, he arrived to the school with a bucket that had, half a dozen piglets in it. One of the students walked over and looked in the bucket and noticed that there was a piglet who was still alive. She was standing on top of the other piglets. Another student who did part-time work on Jenkins Pig Farm walked over, reached into the bucket, grabbed this piglet by her hind legs, and slammed her head first into the ground in front of all the other students. Many of these students were just horrified. They grabbed this piglet, who was still alive, left the classroom, went down the hallway to another teacher named Molly Fearing, who was known as being the vegetarian who cared about animals. She was a first-year teacher at this school. Molly took this dying piglet, left the school, went to a local veterinarian, and had this poor piglet euthanized. There was nothing they could do to help her at this point. Her skull was fractured. She was bleeding out of her mouth. She was vocalizing just in terrible distress. Molly's next stop was to the sheriff's department, and she filed an animal cruelty complaint, and there were cruelty charges filed against Mr. Jenkins. It became a big deal in this local community. It was in the newspaper and on the local news, and it went to trial. And the very first day of that trial, the judge dismissed the case. And he did that because in Ohio, like most states, if something is considered standard agricultural practice, it is exempt from cruelty prosecution. And the practice of slamming baby piglets head first into the ground is considered standard within the pork industry. It is so common that they have a term for it. It's called thumping. And it happens on pig farms across the country every single day. So that case illustrated to me that there needed to be an organization that would work on behalf of farmed animals. It was clear to me that had this been a puppy or a kitten that someone had brought to school and this animal had been slammed into the ground, the cruelty conviction would have stuck. That the student and the teacher involved would have been referred for psychiatric evaluation. They would have been prevented from owning or interacting with animals again. But because it was a farmed animal, because it was a pig, the rule book was completely different. The standard was completely different. And to me, that was a real injustice. It's the way in which we view farmed animals and treat them is really about us. It's not about them. They have the same ability to not only feel pain, but emotions and companionship and love and joy and excitement and fear and stress in the same way as dogs and cats do. Yet in our country, we have two very separate set of rules and expectations with how these animals are treated. Half of companion animals in this country will receive gifts this holiday season. They're considered members of our family. We will send billions of dollars to take care of them. But pigs, for example, more intelligent than dogs, just as sensitive, they are condemned to a life of just absolute deprivation and cruelty. And to me, that's unacceptable.
Now, you had been involved in sort of animal rights protests prior to starting Mercy for Animals, right? I think you're right. In 1997, you went to a protest in Washington, D.C.
That's right. Yeah, when I was 11 years old, so 4 years before starting Mercy for Animals, I heard the term animal rights activist for the very first time. Growing up on a farm, both of my uncles were hunters, trappers, fishermen. I talk in the book about the first and last hunting trip that I took with my uncle when I was, 6 or 7 years old. And, I just always had this natural fascination and empathy for other animals. And it was my companion animals that really started to teach me that all animals, have the same spark for life and the same will to live and crave freedom in the same way. So this was always sort of my base. And I would see animals being shot or skinned alive or fish being scaled. when I was young, and it would always feel just absolutely wrong to me. I'd always have such a visceral reaction. But no one in my family, no one in my community would validate the notion that, yes, we should be protecting other animals instead of abusing them. So it was when I was 11 years old, we were sitting at the kitchen table, and this short, probably 30-second news story came on about people protesting fur at the local mall in Dayton, Ohio. And I remember them showing footage of animals caught in leg hold traps and beavers and traps drowning underwater. And, again, that was the first time I heard the word animal rights activist, and it stuck in my mind. And I remember thinking, wow, there are people who are taking these feelings that I have and doing something about it. They are speaking up on behalf of animals. So that planted a seed. And, probably 5 months later, April came around, and I knew that there was an Earth Day celebration at this same mall in Dayton. So I, begged my mom to take me, and she did. And one of the booths that were set up there was from an animal protection organization. In fact, the same one that had organized the fur protest. So I picked up brochures on factory farming and learned for the first time about these veal crates and gestation crates and battery cages, and read these brochures on the car ride home. And by the time we pulled into our lane back at our farm, I was a vegetarian. And I told my mom that, I'm not going to pay other people to abuse animals anymore, and that I wouldn't eat meat. So that was the beginning. And of course, this was before social media, before YouTube. So I was very isolated. I went to the local libraries. I would get the few books that they had. I would write letters for information, and did what I could as an 11-year-old in a farming community to start to learn more about animal protection. And then when I was 13, I convinced my parents to drive to Washington, D.C. to take me to an animal rights conference. So it was sort of a slow burn, but it was this incident in my backyard at our local high school that really propelled me to say, I need to do more, and found the organization.
Right. So you started out just being, aware of your inner feelings, that something was wrong.
Yeah.
They weren't validated. Then you found a group of people who, for the first time, validated that like what you were feeling was a thing. But you also write that the DC protest was ineffective. And I'm really curious what you learned from the initial efforts that you witnessed and partook of, because you've kind of become like the reason you're so important is not that just that you're passionate and well-spoken and ethical, but incredibly effective. So I'm curious how these early experiences of seeing things that weren't so effective educated and informed you as you grew into an activist.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I attended my first protest 20 years ago, and I've been to so many protests, I probably can't even count that high, to be honest. So, it has certainly been a journey, and I am now a firm believer that we need to be more than right. We need to be effective, and we need to win hearts and minds, not arguments and debates. So, I think that so many advocates, and this is true for animal advocates and environmental advocates and LGBT advocates and just all types of equality activists, are driven by passion and are fueled oftentimes, at least in the beginning, by anger. And, rightfully so. There's a lot to be angry about and to be sad about. But we need to channel that in an effective way. And, for me, my journey started from information and being offered information and then gradually support. I don't know many advocates who got to where they are because they were shamed or guilted or yelled at. So I think it's really important that we think critically about how we are advocating on behalf of animals or on any other topic. Because oftentimes what might feel good for us, what might feel like it sort of releases the pressure valve and we get an opportunity to yell and scream and vent isn't what's most effective. So for me, it's been a 20-year journey of, doing all sorts of protests and actions and realizing that much of it wasn't having the impact that I wanted. And really sort of every year tweaking and refining and being very honest with myself about, is this working? Looking at data. I mean, now we have a statistician on staff now at Mercy for Animals. We really dive into data with messaging and communications, and we really use metrics to evaluate the tactics that we're using on a whole host of levels. So yeah, I think in a really general sense, that's an important way to look at our activism. And it has helped informed, the work that I do and the organization does in so many ways. And oftentimes what's most effective isn't the most glamorous. It doesn't, feel as exciting in the moment. But as I said, animals need us to be effective. So, it helped lead me down a path of doing a lot more educational work. Which at first for Mercy for Animals was standing on street corners and on college campuses and outside of music festivals and just passing out literature on factory farming. And then we sort of evolved to bring these homemade contraptions where we played video footage on street corners out. But now with social media and again, YouTube and Facebook, the floodgates have opened. We can reach people in a much larger way. We now reach 250 million people through our videos every year at Mercy for Animals, which is a far cry from when I was standing on street corners hoping that, we'd get a couple dozen people to stop. So, we always have to be open to change. And so those are some of the lessons that I've learned over the years.
Right. And I guess another big difference in addition to the scale is that the videos that are on social media, people have a choice whether to watch them or not. So they actually are pressing play. They are agreeing to something as opposed to, the typical sort of standing on the street corner or screaming at people for buying meat at Whole Foods or spraying, like you're imposing yourself as opposed to inviting people.
Yeah, and the great thing with social media and video sharing is then people can choose to share it. The ripple effect grows. And, Mercy for Animals, we produce about 4 videos a week. And people that aren't familiar, they should definitely follow us on all the social media platforms. I mean, we certainly release these hard-hitting investigations, but we also do a ton of vegan cooking videos and spotlights on vegan restaurants and bakeries. And, it's most of the content actually is very uplifting and heartwarming and, showing how smart and playful pigs are, for example, and all of that. So yeah, I do hope that people will follow us, will take a look at these videos, and that they'll share the ones that really resonate with them, because social media really has leveled the playing field in many ways. I talk in the book about when I first started Mercy for Animals. I mean, we would do almost anything to get the media's attention for just a second so that we could get, that 30-second clip on the news, similar to the one that opened my eyes. But today we don't need to do that. Through social media, we can reach people like never before. So, that's one thing that I talk about in terms of how people can get involved is how to be an effective e-advocate. I talk about e-activism driving real change and how, big companies are now very much tuning into to social media, to the conversations happening on social media, and how that is helped drive some international policy change that affects millions and millions of animals every year.
Right. See, there's what I hear from a lot of people is a kind of turning up their nose at the idea of collectivism or e-activism as being uncommitted, as not being the real thing. Your data-driven, statistics-informed models say otherwise, that we are being effective. We can be effective on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, I think for a period of time was probably in that same camp of turning up the nose to what some people call slacktivism. And, but the data is very different. And it shows that it can have an absolute huge impact. And we've seen it firsthand at Mercy for Animals, just in terms of helping to inspire people to change their diet, in terms of pushing big companies to make changes. So yeah, people absolutely should be involved. And as I said in the book, I talk a little bit about how to do that perhaps more effectively. That doesn't mean that you have to stop there. It doesn't mean that that's the only avenue available for people, but it can be a very important avenue. One of the things I talk about in the book is finding your unique voice. And I think that advocacy work isn't a one size fits all. I always tell people always ask me, well, what can I do? I always say, well, the answer can be very different for each person. People have different personality types. Some people are extremely extrovert and they love, presenting in front of large groups. They love speaking to people. Others are, brilliant introverts that are great at writing, who are talented artists, who are, incredible chefs, who, are bankers. Really, because the animal protection movement is so diverse and we are looking really for societal change, we need people that are skilled and talented and connected in really every area that you could imagine. So, I always say, find out what your skills are and find a unique way to marry that with your passion for helping animals. And, the sky's the limit. It really is about creativity. And like I said, I think Lonnie Munter, the vegan race car driver, is a great example of that. Some people would say, well, what's the commonality of being a race car driver and being vegan? Well, she uses it as a platform. She's actually had vegan-themed cars that she's driven to reach, tens of millions of people in many ways, in an audience that isn't as exposed to this issue as others would be. So, I think that that's really the key to sustainability as well, is to find your unique voice in a way that stimulates you. If you're an artist, you can use your platform in so many brilliant ways to inspire people to think about these issues in a way that they have never done before. I talk about, people that have started vegan food companies, including one of the former executives of Burger King, who said that he sort of started to see that he was on the dark side of food, and he started Sweet Earth, which now is a vegan food company, or vegetarian food company that has products all over the place. So I think there's always an opportunity, number one, to pivot in your life and to transform and to move towards kindness. And there's always an opportunity to use your unique place and perspective on the world to bring about change.
Right. And, I'm recalling when you talked about, it's natural to feel the passion, to feel the anger, and you need to, we need to be more effective, and you can do that by having statisticians and being data driven and being strategic. But when push comes to shove, when you're in a conversation, it's, your character and your capabilities as a human soul that are going to determine whether you're going to fly off the handle at someone or not. And I'm sure you've seen it too. I've seen plenty of conversations with vegans and animal rights activists who are creating more opposition than existed before. What was your trajectory and the trajectory of people you've seen and worked with intimately to kind of develop themselves to not be, angry or shaming or guilting or yelling, but engaging in much more effective, more Gandhi-esque, Martin Luther King-esque approaches that are way more effective statistically. How do folks go about that journey?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think it's important for us to remember what it was like for us before we were vegan, when we were pre-vegan or pre-vegetarian, or even just pre-aware of how animals were suffering. I mean, to me, it's kind of remarkable how quickly people can sort of get amnesia and forget about the fact that they were someone that you might be having a conversation with, a few months ago or a few years ago, and how sort of righteous and judgmental, advocates can get so quickly when, again, they were in that position not long ago. So, for me, I think part of it is, some people like to say, instead of people who aren't vegan, consider them pre-vegans. So I think a lot of it is the perception that we have of the people that we are talking with. And, it's important to me to really remember that everyone considers themselves a good person. And, everyone considers themselves someone who wants to do what's right. Most people want to do what they consider to be fair and compassionate. And, we need to honor that is their identity and where they're at, as opposed to us coming to conversations, with judgment and shame and guilt towards that person. And again, I understand the feelings. It can feel like this is an urgent issue and animals are suffering now, and I'm their only voice, so I need to tell it like it is. And there is truth to that, but we also need to do it in a way where those that we are speaking with can hear it. And a lot of it is just the way in which we talk to people, sharing I statements. I found this, footage, I found factory farming to be really against my morals and my ethics. And I decided that it wasn't something that I wanted to participate in. And I have found, vegan eating to be delicious and accessible and healthy. And I found that my life has improved. People can't argue with your experience, but they hear that experience. Where if you have a conversation saying, you are supporting the torture of animals and you are the reason why these animals are dying, and you need to change what you are doing, it's few people will really receive that in a positive way. They will immediately get defensive. So we can share the same information and we can have the same substance of a conversation, but the way in which we do it can have really a dramatic impact. I always talk about the importance of being a joyful vegan and leading by example. If people think that, becoming vegan or an animal advocate means that you're going to have to be angry and depressed and deprived
sign me
all
up.
the time. Yeah, where's the sign-up sheet? Most people want to live happy lives. Most people want to, have lives that are rich in connection and joy and love, and we do too. And to me, being vegan is actually the ultimate expression of love. It is a way of living, a reflection of our deepest values. So I think there's a lot of different ways of talking about veganism, and sure, it's against cruelty, but more importantly, it's for compassion. So I think how we choose to just, live our lives and the examples that we make in doing so are very profound, and people notice that. So being a joyful vegan and just offering, food. A lot of times people will only talk about the why, like you should do this because of antibiotic use, you should do this because of the environment. And these are important conversations to have, but we also need to be talking about the how, because there are a lot of people who understand that factory farming is a terrible thing. They understand that they're eating too much meat, but they don't know where to start. They don't know what to eat on a daily basis. So we need to be, beacons of information to let them know, hey, I totally get it. I was lost in the beginning. I didn't know where to start. But what I found was that, I found a lot of vegan options at Thai restaurants and Ethiopian restaurants and Mexican and hey, you might not know, but like a lot of what you're eating is vegan or could easily be made vegan. So we need to offer support. And that's a big part of what Mercy for Animals does is, sure, we expose the cruelty and it's important to drive change, but a lot of what we do is also giving people the tools and resources they need. We have a website, chooseveg.com. We have a free veg starter guide. We produce, the video content and resources to really help direct people, down that path of a compassionate lifestyle. Melanie Joy has spoken about and written now 3 books about carnism, which is this invisible belief that it's okay to eat certain animals. And I think she does a really excellent job of pointing out that eating animals, especially eating a very small number of species out of all the species on the planet, is a belief system. And certainly the more you get out of the Western world, you see how that belief system can vary in other parts of the world. Some, it's considered totally normal and acceptable to eat dogs and cats. And, others, cows are considered sacred and absolutely, should not be slaughtered at all. So these are just beliefs that people have. But especially in Western cultures, we just assume that eating meat is normal, natural, and necessary, when we, of course, know that that's not the case. And oftentimes in these conversations, people sort of immediately puts people into 3 different categories. One is that you are a hero or a victim or a perpetrator. And it can be difficult when you're talking to sort of a pre-vegan or a meat eater to say, okay, well, I don't view you as a hero. You don't seem like you're a victim, so you must be a perpetrator. And conversations and how you interact with someone who you view as a perpetrator can be, far more hostile and accusatory. So we need to sort of, I think, take a more holistic approach to how we view others, and that they've really bought into this notion of carnism unconsciously. We're raised, believing that we have to eat turkey for Thanksgiving. We need to have, barbecues that have meat. Like animal products are so woven into our culture and our upbringing and, memories with our families. So asking someone to reconsider that and to go down a path that changes their diet is, it's a big thing to talk about. So we need to understand that, and as I said, I think be joyful reflections of what that lifestyle is, and be as supportive as possible to those that are interested in considering that journey.
Right, and I have loved that model of I've called it sort of rescuer, victim, and perpetrator. But hero makes sense too. And the interesting thing I find about that is that the roles are extremely fungible. That the minute you see someone else as a perpetrator and you start haranguing them, then all of a sudden they're the victim. You see yourself as the hero. They see you as the perpetrator, and you're contributing to the energy behind that story. Right. Yeah. There's the details of we're cruel to animals, we're cruel to each other, we're cruel to the poor, we're cruel to anyone who's different. And where that comes from is this sort of oppositional model that we have in our heads, which I wanted to ask you about, because you talk about not shaming people, and yet there's a story in your book about you are doing some undercover filming at the pork producers, and one of your undercover folks, Amy, actually gets on stage and proclaims a toast, and then proceeds to, in her own words, shame on you. And I'm wondering, is that something you would do now? Was that designed? Yeah. How does that fit into how you now see advocacy?
Yeah, I mean, this is a story that I would say fits into what we were talking about earlier, of this 20-year journey of advocacy work. Starting at protests when I was 13 and having people throw chicken bones at us and spit at us, and this evolution. I mean, we used to do protests against the fur industry where people would wear fur coats and literally put paper bags on their head that spelled out the word shame. So, and I would definitely put this in that same category as, I think all of our life stories include things that now we look back and we say, hey, that's not something that is in line with my current values or my current understanding of the world. And I would certainly put that story and that tactic in that bucket as well.
Gotcha. And yet, one of sort of two of your buckets are there's undercover investigation and legal advocacy, and there's wonderful stories about your crack team of investigators and this amazing lawyer and other folks that you've worked with, and kind of the legal system is all about guilt and judgment. How do you maintain? How do you maintain the balance between saying everyone's a pre-vegan, everyone has the potential to be good, to be transformed, and yet operate within a system in which adjudication is due to wrongdoing?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a great question. We also live in a world that's not black or white, but there's a lot of gray area, and for us. Legal advocacy includes that. When we do these investigations, a lot of what we uncover are these institutionalized, systemic abuses. Keeping animals in cages where they can't turn around, mutilating animals without painkillers, grinding up baby chicks while they're still alive. These are the standard practices that would be illegal if the victims were dogs or cats, but it's considered good business. If farmed animals are the victims of it. So these are the practices that we really seek to change the most, because this is where we can affect the lives of the most animals. But when we do investigations, our investigators, they let their cameras roll and they document what happens there. And oftentimes there will be malicious and sadistic cruelty towards these animals, things that do rise to the level of being a violation of anti-cruelty statutes, things like workers taking crowbars and beating cows over the head, 40 times, or stabbing them with pitchforks or breaking their tails to get them to move. And when we do document this, we really have, in many ways, a legal obligation to hand this evidence over to law enforcement, along with the rest of the case. And if we don't do that, we are, in certain situations, sort of legally at risk ourselves for not reporting that abuse. So, we do what needs to be done when working within the legal system. At the same time, our main focus is pushing these companies rather than the individual workers. In most cases, the companies themselves to be held accountable, and for them to really change their overall practices. We understand that these things aren't isolated incidents, and I talk in the book a lot about how most of the workers inside of these facilities are really victims themselves. Many of them are undocumented workers. They take these jobs out of desperation. Few people grow up in the U.S. Saying that they want to work in a slaughterhouse one day. These are dirty, dangerous, demoralizing, dehumanizing jobs. So much of the workforce falls to these undocumented workers who take these jobs out of desperation to provide for their families. And in doing so, because they're not citizens, they really have few channels to speak up on their own behalf. Slaughterhouses are one of the most dangerous jobs in this country. People get body parts cut off by machinery. They get carpal tunnel. They get, knocked down by animals. It's a terrible working environment. So, I talk about that in the book. I talk about the physical struggle and pain that many of these workers endure, but also the emotional distress that is oftentimes caused by working in factory farms and slaughterhouses. So, this is a big part of why Mercy for Animals works to promote plant-based eating and cellular agriculture and alternatives to animal agriculture, because not only is it really inherently abusive and exploitive for animals to be used in these systems, but there's a real human toll and cost as well. So that's always at the forefront of sort of the society that we are advocating for and pushing for. And to be honest, working for meaningful world change within a broken system is difficult work. It's difficult work. It can be messy work. But we do the best that we can, to be honest about the situation, and help drive change that really has a big picture view as well.
Right, and I loved the way you framed that discussion of, there's no such thing as animal cruelty without human cruelty. There's no such thing as animal abuse without human abuse. I'm thinking about an essay that I read from a book, I think it was written in the 70s, called About Looking by John Berger. He has a chapter called Why Look at Animals, and he points out historically that however we treat our domesticated animals this century is how we're going to treat our people in the future, from using them as pack mules to confinement to genetic testing, that basically whatever becomes permissible or thinkable around animals, we end up doing it to ourselves, and there's really no distinction.
Yeah, the famous quote attributed to Gandhi, you can judge the moral progress of a nation by the way it treats its animals. And, I think that that's very true. And, the flip side to, a society going down a path of abusing animals and what that means for people, the flip side is a society that respects animals and is moving towards a more compassionate relationship with animals. And, I oftentimes talk about, if we are able to extend our circle of compassion to include animals and ensure that circle of compassion includes farmed animals or currently farmed animals, that says a lot about who we are as people. That says a lot about who we are as a society. How we treat those who are weak and vulnerable and at our mercy, I think says a lot about our core values. And if we are able to live lives and build a society where, cows and pigs and chickens are treated with respect, certainly that would include our fellow humans. We talk about the sort of moral and ethical evolution of human societies. And, first it starts with self, and then family, and then tribe, and then, nation and race and religion and et cetera, this wave and ripple effect outward, as our understanding and as our needs, are satisfied, we can and history is a lesson in this for the most part, continuing to bring quote unquote others and other groups into the sphere of consideration. And I think that the time has certainly come for that to include animals, and including farmed animals. I think it is a necessary and important part of human ethical and moral evolution.
Right. Which brings me to a question that I wrote down early in the book. I didn't think we necessarily would get to it, but I was really curious about your choice of the word mercy. And I was thinking, why not choose justice for animals or freedom for animals? But the word mercy is not about the animals, but about the humans. What made you choose that word? And have you kept it because of convenience of branding, or is it still something that you think it was the right choice?
Yeah, well, I think justice for animals and freedom for animals would also be great names for organizations. And in fact, I believe that there are organizations with those names. I still believe that mercy for animals is a really appropriate name. I think it's a powerful name. The truth of the matter is, farmed animals are at our mercy. I think that some people would say, well, mercy inherently means that we have power, and that it just what the meaning of that is, and that is true. We are at a stage where we are confining animals. We are manipulating every moment of their lives. We are manipulating their bodies. We are genetically engineering these animals, many of them becoming prisoners of their own bodies. We are deciding when they live and when they die. So it is an accurate reflection of our current relationship with these animals. They are weak and vulnerable to us on a large scale, and we can choose cruelty or we can choose mercy. And I think that choosing mercy not only spares and improves the lives of these animals, but I think that we as humans benefit from exercising this mercy and compassion as well.
And one of the parts of the book that affected me most emotionally was my empathy for your undercover workers who went in, and I'd never thought about this at all before. I thought they just sort of got in, got the footage, got out, they were in danger, but it never occurred to me that they had to spend weeks or sometimes months doing the things that they were you were trying to uncover, that they had to kill the animals in cruel ways. They had to debeak and hang the turkeys up while alive, these 40, 50-pound birds whose limbs would break from their own weight. And I got to be thinking, like, if I did that, I would probably stop being an animal rights activist, and I would probably become like I would lose my capacity. I'd either go nuts or I would lose my capacity to give a shit. And in fact, at the end of the book, you have someone talking about this. It's called perpetrator-induced traumatic stress. And
that's right.
I'd love for you to talk about what it was like to send people in. You did some early, I guess, and then I don't know how many you've done lately of you going in. I guess you're pretty hard to go undercover now because you're a known entity. But what was it like to witness that and to send people to that kind of war?
Yeah. It's I say that investigators are the hidden heroes or the unsung heroes of the animal protection movement, and that's not a description that I put out into the world lightly. And I describe them and feel this way about them for very good reason. And many of these investigators, Pete, who is a big focus of the book, I consider very much to be, a dear friend and a brother to me. I've known him for over a decade. And Cody and Liz and the others that are profiled in the book. This is really difficult work. We have only about 1% of the people who contact Mercy for Animals and apply to be an investigator will actually make it into the field. Once people really start to understand that this is not a glamorous sort of James Bond position, this is rolling up your sleeve, leaving your friends and your family behind, going and living out of a dumpy motel out in the middle of nowhere by yourself for sometimes months on end, shoveling manure all day, putting animals into cages, depending on the job, putting animals on slaughter lines. This is not only physically difficult work and in some ways damaging work, but it is emotionally traumatic work. There's no way around that. As you said, it is like going to war. It's like war journalists, going and being on the front line and, seeing people die in front of them. There's no other way to do these employment-based investigations. And, our investigators can't go and pretend to be employees, and they can't, just pick up a broom and pretend to be sweeping in the corner. They have to be there and they have to work. And their jobs can vary dramatically, but sometimes they are right there on the line. They are, moving these animals. They are doing this work, and they're always very careful not to engage in illegal abuse. They do everything in their power to do their work as kind and as gently as they can for the animals, and never to to be engaged in malicious abuse. But there's inherent suffering that goes hand in hand with doing these jobs. And working in a pig factory farm, we tell the story of Liz, having to cut the tails off of these piglets, and how difficult that is, morally and emotionally, to do as an investigator, and always having to, and not being able to rescue these animals that are suffering right in front of you, which is all of them are suffering. So it is a morally conflicting place to be. And it's so important for our investigators to remember that though they might not be able to help the individual animal in front of them, their work and them keeping their composure and being able to finish their case can help change the future for countless other animals that have yet to be born. And through their sacrifice and through their dedication, we can help push for change that will mean that the animals that come ahead will hopefully lead lives that are filled with less misery and less suffering and more freedom. And ultimately, it will lead to the day when no animal will need to be or will be raised and killed in these horrific manners. But yes, I agree with you. I think that's some of the most compelling narrative in the book is really getting a look at the daily struggles that these investigators face. And, I talk about the perpetration-induced traumatic stress form of PTSD that not only investigators suffer from, but other workers in factory farms and slaughterhouses suffer from. A lot of these workers, they take these jobs out of desperation, so they care about animals too. They don't want to go and slit the throats of animals all day. It's just the jobs that they take. And we oftentimes will see high rates of alcoholism, drug abuse inside of these facilities, forms of self-medication. And I talk about some psychologists that did a review of communities where slaughterhouses are based, and looking at the Sinclair effect, a theory put forward over 100 years ago by Upton Sinclair, that in communities where slaughterhouses are based, oftentimes there would be much higher rates of violent crime, including homicides that are carried out in the same manner in which animals are slaughtered inside of the local slaughterhouse. So, I think we really have to ask ourselves, do slaughterhouses and factory farms that not only support violence towards animals, but also are so horrific that they breed PTSD and propel further violence towards humans, do these places have a place in a civilized society? Do slaughterhouses belong in a moral and ethical society? And to me, the answer is very clear. It's no. People aren't going to pick apples or berries or harvest corn in fields and coming back with PTSD. We don't go to tofu factories and see people needing to self-medicate in order to produce the tofu. So I think we really need to view this as part of this abusive system.
Right. I mean, when I looked up the PITS, the perpetration-induced traumatic stress, I looked at the list of symptoms, and I kind of feel like that is a sort of global bucket diagnosis for our society. Alcohol, cocaine abuse, opioid abuse, alienation, hypervigilance, sense of disintegration. That's all of us. That's the world. That's the background, the emotional and psychic background of our lives. And I think you can trace it to a lot of things, but factory farms are. I mean, it's what we eat. right?
Yeah.
It's where we get our calories is the ground zero of perpetration.
Hey, I mean, as they say, you are what you eat, and if that is true, we are a lot of fear and a lot of sadness. To look into the eyes of animals that are waiting to be killed or are snapped upside down and being moved towards the electrified water. These animals are terrified, and that is how they die.
Yeah. Hey, I have a favor. We're at an hour. I promised we would stop at an hour, and I would love to end with hope and optimism because
Yes.
the book is optimistic. I've heard you in other interviews. You are, relentlessly optimistic, and it's not because you're delusional. It's because you've won incredible victories. Could you talk a little bit about for the Nestle victory, and then the last bit of the book, all the things on the horizon that are inevitably going to make animal agriculture wither and die?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the Nestle success is one that I'm most proud of. Nestle is the world's largest food manufacturer. They operate in over 90 countries. Mercy for Animals did an investigation, which I talk about in the book, at one of their dairy suppliers in Wisconsin that documented just horrific abuse. And we launched this as in association with DiGiorno, which is the largest pizza brand under Nestle. And because of that investigation, we were able to bring Nestle to the table. They were just absolutely shocked and horrified to get visibility of what was happening inside of their dairy supply chain. And after some campaigning and multiple meetings, we were able to get Nestle to commit to really the most comprehensive farm animal welfare policy ever adopted at that time by a food company. And they committed to get pigs out of gestation crates, calves out of veal crates, hens out of battery cages, to stop the live shackle and slaughter of birds from meat, to stop the mutilations of cows, meaning cutting off their tails, to stop the mutilation of piglets, tails being cut off and being castrated. And this was not just a policy that applied to the U.S., but applied to these 90 countries in which they operate. So affecting hundreds of thousands of individual farms and millions upon millions of animals every single year. And this is a change that started from one investigator getting a job at a dairy farm, having to witness this horrible abuse, and is an example of what I was talking about before, of these investigators having to stand there but do the work knowing that they're working to change the future. And this is just a really classic example of that. The other part of the book is the future of food, which I just couldn't be more excited about. I truly believe that the future is bright. There's a recent study done that found that 1% of baby boomers identify as vegetarian, 4% of Gen Xers, and 12% of millennials identify as vegetarian. So if you look at the chart, the trajectory is very clear, and it is rapidly moving towards a tipping point, which gives me great hope. And I think if you look back at other social justice issues, if you look back at women's rights and suffrage, if you look at civil rights, if you look at LGBT rights, these are movements that largely progressed from one generation to the next. And I think that the time has come for animal protection to see that same sort of generational progression. And I think that we're seeing that now. But, the future of food, I think that we are quickly moving towards a day when the kind, compassionate, healthy option is the accessible option. It becomes the default option. And I talk about innovators in the food space, everyone from Ethan Brown with Beyond Meat to the folks at Impossible Foods, which are making vegan burgers that bleed with vegan heme in it. I talk about Uma Valetti, who is a cardiologist who is saving lives in hospitals realized that we were taking cells, stem cells, and growing them for medical purposes, and that same technology could be used to grow meat, real meat, outside of animals by simply taking a stem cell, putting it in a suitable growth medium, putting it in bioreactors, growing it, brewing it, technology that now already exists and is starting to scale. And just a few weeks ago, Uma's company Memphis Meats attracted investments from Bill Gates, from Cargill, a major meat company itself. We're seeing Tyson doing an investment in Beyond Meat. And to me, that is a sign of progress. It's a sign of these huge meat companies or protein companies seeing the writing is on the wall, that this is the trajectory. And as I said before, this really has to be the trajectory. People say, ask me, will we see an end of factory farming in our lifetime or in my lifetime? And I say, yes, absolutely. We really don't have a choice. Factory farming is just so inefficient. Raising animals for food is so inefficient that, we will absolutely need to have this innovation. And I think that we're already seeing that happen, and it is growing by leaps and bounds every year. So while there is a lot of work to be done, and none of us that know about this issue and care about this can sit by idly and just wait for change to come about. There's a lot of work to be done, but I am very optimistic that the future is bright, and I am optimistic that we will be able to answer the question to future generations, oh my gosh, I can't believe you actually raised animals in this way. What did you do to bring about that change? And, I know that I will have a good answer to that. And I hope that everyone listening that's moved by this, that is compelled by this issue, will start to take action today, so that, for their children or their grandchildren, when they ask, what did you do to help bring about this great revolution? We'll be able to be proud of the answer that they give.
Right on. How can people find you, follow you, stay in touch?
Yeah, so people can go to mercyforanimals.org. They can follow us on all the social media platforms simply at Mercy for Animals, and they can find me personally on all the social media platforms at Nathan Runkle. And again, the book is Mercy for Animals, and it's available now everywhere that books are sold.
Great, and it was co-written by my buddy Gene Stone, who
yes,
who's a fantastic human being and a great blessing to the movement and to the world. And Nathan Runkle, such an honor, such a pleasure. So it was so unexpected to get that email. I jumped on it right away, and I'm so happy that you are doing the work you're doing, inspiring people from all walks of life. And I hope the book, hits number one on all the important lists, and that you continue to go from strength to strength. And thank you so much for taking the time today.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. It was a real joy.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Plant Yourself podcast, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes. And for more information about the Big Change Program, led by me and Josh Lajani, visit bigchangeprogram.com. And be sure to check out the show notes for today's episode with links to everything we talked about at plantyourself.com/235. If you're new to this show, you can catch up on 234 archived episodes over at plantyourself.com. And if you get the podcast, but not my weekly-ish newsletter, you can get it and also get the Slippery Slope Report, how to stop yourself from falling off of that, the pinnacle of dietary and lifestyle and exercise success, and you make one little slip up, and then before you know it, you're way back doing all the things you did before, and you can't figure out how you got there or why it happened or how to ever get back on your feet again. Well, I have a report that helps you avoid that and recover from it if it does get that far. And it's called the Slippery Slope Report. And you can find it at plantyourself.com/slippery-slope. And when you sign up for that, you also get added to the Big Change Bulldog, that weekly-ish newsletter to which I just referred. So now that you've listened to the podcast, if you're interested in getting a free copy of Nathan's book, Mercy for Animals, here's what you do. Grab the URL for this episode, which is plantyourself.com/235. This is the 235th show. Plantyourself.com/235. And you can post that on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, and then email me, hj@plantyourself.com. Send me the link to your post or your tweet or your Insta, whatever, and each of those will be one entry. So if you want to do more, if you have groups on Facebook that you are part of where it would be appropriate, or fan pages, or multiple Twitter or Instagram accounts, every one of those will count as an entry. And I'll semi-randomly pick a couple that I like from all of the entries that I get and send out a couple of books. Unfortunately, I don't have Nathan's autograph on those books, but they are still books and they have Nathan's face on the cover. And so hopefully that's good enough. Okay, now to garden news. Things are getting chilly here, been in the high mid-30s in the mornings, and so I'm expecting it to dip below 30 any day now. So we went out with a ton of bricks and some row covers, which are just these sort of woven cloth thingies that you can kind of like put over your beds like sort of diapers. And they can protect up to, depending on the thickness of the cloth, to 30 or 27 or 26. Sometimes we'll double and triple up to keep our greens going all winter. But now if you look, you'll just see these sort of waving, billowing things in the wind like sails of an old-fashioned ship. In running news, hasn't been very much running. I actually got a little bit sick over the weekend. Maybe you could still hear it in my voice. I prefer to think of it now as sultry as opposed to hoarse. But apparently it's a thing for marathoners and ultramarathoners to have a upper respiratory infection like 2 weeks after their race, sort of a blowback to the immune system. Even all the greens I eat didn't completely prevent it, but I was okay. I managed to go for a 12-mile run on Saturday, but I've done very little since then as I'm trying to heal, and I don't think a month off after that 50K is the worst thing in the world. But I'm starting to itch for it, so I might go for a short run this afternoon and then work my way back in to training for the Boston qualifying event that I'm looking at in March. All right, now it's time to thank the patrons. And I do want to say I'm up to like $425 a month on Patreon, which is very exciting. And a bunch of people this week, seemingly out of the blue, increased their pledges. So, and you don't get anything extra for increasing your pledge from $5 to $10 or $15 to $20 a month. There is no bonuses that you get for increasing those levels. So those were done simply out of the goodness of people's hearts to support the show. So if you're not supporting the show and you would like to, just go to plantyourself.com and click on the Patreon link in the right sidebar on pretty much any page, and you can then set all that up. So let's talk about all the people who are doing that right now. Kim Harrison, Lynn McClellan, Anthony Disson, Brittany Porter, Dominic Mara, Barbara Whitney, Tammy Black, Amy Good, Amanda Hatherley, Mary Jane Wheeler, Ellen Kennelly, Melissa Cobb, Rachel Behrens, Christine Nielsen, Tina Sharf, Tina Ahern, Jennifer Kanofsky, David Bizek, The Mysterious Michelle X, Elspeth Feldman, Victoria Dolomanova, Leah Stroll, Alan Christensen, Colleen Peck, Michelle Andrew, Josina, Julianne Rowland, Stu Dolnick, Sarah Durkis, Run the Circus, Kelly Cameron, Wayne Pedersen, Leanne Peterson, Janet Selby, Claire Adams, Tom Franzek, Jeanette Vedham, Gil Lasser, David Donahue, Blair Seibert, Doron Avizov, Gio and Carolyn Argentati, Jody Friesner, Ruth Ann Thunderberg, Misha Rosen, Michael Warbeck, The Equally Mysterious Tracy Z, Alicia Lemus, Rebecca Hughes, Val Lindemann, Rhymes with Cinnamon, Nick Harper, Stephanie Holmes, Martha Berger, Nicole Ramsey, Susan Alman, Molly Levine, The Inscrutable Harry R., Susan Laverty, The Panda Vegan, Craig Hovick, Adam Sharp, Karen Burry, Heather Morgan, Ashley Corcoran, Telly Machia, Deanne Norton, Bonnie Lynch, Plant Happy Oregon, Sabine Kurtzels, Nigel Davies, Marion Blum, Teresa Copel, Shell Rutledge, Julian Watkins, Breed O'Connell, Brian Sheridan, Shannon Hirschman, Linda Rolls, Linda Ayat, Julie Lang, Holm Hedegaard, and Isa Tuzinoa for your generous support of the podcast. That's it for this week. As always, be well, my friends.